today I'm actually going to do something a little bit different. I am going to be talking about my twin flame relationship, how I'm still in it, how we've managed to avoid separation almost, and just sharing my journey in the hopes that it will resonate with some of you out there. This journey to me has been really life-changing, really profound, and there's been a lot of help that I've received online, so this feels like my way of kind of contributing back into that community. Before I begin, I am going to offer some loving, healing energy to you as a thank you for taking your precious time on this planet and sharing that with me. So I'm going to send love from my heart. Was received well. Okay, so I'll begin. 3 years ago, so 3 years ago, I was working in mental health, and I was running an office in Sheffield, and at the time I was in quite a dark place in my life, although I suppose at the time I felt like I was emerging into something. I wasn't quite sure about it, and I had completely sworn off men and women. I wasn't dating. I was in this really rough place. I'd been with dating a lot of narcissistic people, and yeah, I had my heart broken a few times. So I'd been single for about 2 years, and then I dated, and then about 2 months before I met my twin Alex, I had completely decided that I wasn't going to date at all. Obviously Spirit and the universe had other ideas, so at January, which would be 2019, I think, yeah, I was at work and this guy walks into the door, and I immediately just knew that this guy was I was besotted, immediately. he had this like presence. The way that he looked at me, the way that he spoke to me and recognized me, and like I immediately knew. I was like, wow, okay, this is someone that I was like, I wasn't thinking that, but it was like there was just a knowing that this person was like here for a reason. And I remember asking one of the other ladies that I worked with, who was dealing with his paperwork because he was just starting. I was like, oh, what's his name? You know, what's this guy about? I needed to find out like as much information as I physically could. So yeah, I did a little bit of stalking, but I found out his details, and then yeah, I'd been like searching him, and I found out a little bit about his life, and that was it. About a week later, he started work, and we'd had a little bit of like an exchange over Instagram, and so immediately I was in this place of I was riding off the back of like a hard codependent like period in my life. So I was getting really attached to all these messages that he'd been, you know, that he'd sent me, even though he was like really innocent. And yeah, anyway, I digress. So he started work, and after about a week we were just completely inseparable. We were spending like every like possible moment together. We talked about so much, and we like had all these moments where we realized that we were in the same places at the same times. We'd had similar groups of friends that knew each other. We were in like living streets away at around about the same time, but we'd never met each other. And to say that I mean, Sheffield's it's a big city, but it felt really small when you grow up there because everybody kind of knew everybody. So we had all this in common, and it was like, you know, you meet somebody and you have a lot in common, but this felt like so much, like just felt profound. It felt so profound. So by the end of this first week, I was like practically living at his house, and it was all like, oh wow, you know, am I just rushing into something? Is this okay to be this close to someone after a week? And then yeah, so it kind of, we had this period for about 3 months. Within about 2 months, we had decided that we wanted to move in together. It was all this kind of snowball stuff, and it was, you know, it was a lot of fun. We had a lot of great times, but we were kind of masking it, as we were masking all the healing that was about to explode. So we were drinking, we were smoking some weed, you know, there were a lot of like unhealthy like eating habits. I was actually like hardcore vegan at the time. That'll come later. I am no longer. So the healing really started to kick off, and after about 4 or 5 months, the more that we spent time together. So we were doing things, and there were like these really incredible shifts happening in our relationship. There were moments where I was like looking into his eyes, and I was seeing like blue gods appear, and I was losing consciousness almost, and drifting off into spirit realms. And this had like never happened to me before. So I was quite stunned by that whole experience. So after about 3 or 4 months, I remember listening to this kind of inner child meditation music on. You know, we were kind of doing a lot of spiritual practices, but in a bit of a light way, if we can say that. Oh God, incense is just blasting my face. So I'd been doing this inner child healing meditation, and then all of a sudden, like, the flood of tears just came barreling out of my face at a rate of like knots. It was completely different to any time I'd cried before in my entire life, even through periods of like deep emotional grief. So I was crying and crying and crying, and this started to happen often. I'd start to cry, and it felt like because I was with Alex, it felt okay, it felt safe. And I've had a lot of relationships in my life. One in particular I was in for about 10 years, and I held on to a lot of stuff. I held on to a lot of grief. I didn't share a lot of my life with that person. I wasn't really affectionate. I wasn't really loving at the time. But immediately, like, I felt like this person I can trust with, like, the deepest, like, darkest of secrets that I'd really, like, held on to. So all this purging was coming out. All this dark, like, buried, like, past was starting to seep out. And then, wow, I mean, it just progressed from there. And there's been so many moments that I'm going to talk about that were really like pinnacle moments in our relationship. So Alex at the time was dealing with quite a lot of anger and pain, and he had really struggled with love in his life. He had a really profound, like, awakening already about 2 years prior to meeting me, through the existence of a quite an abusive relationship that he was in, and that had completely shifted his being to the point that he was just a totally different person to the one that he was before. But there was a lot of, like, repressed emotion. There was a lot of grief still existing for his old life. So there's, like, I think in a twin flame relationship there's a lot of triggering that goes on, which I think is like super important for people to understand. That triggering at the level when you meet your twin flame is so sharp, and it feels so bitter and so deep, that it's possibly like one of it's one of the most painful experiences of my entire life. And I've experienced quite a fair amount of trauma already. But the triggering was like everything. Like, this person to me was like my mirror. He was someone, well, he is someone that shows me all of the areas that I need to work on. But at the time I was just riding in on this high wave, and like, I don't want to look at this stuff. Who's this guy? I was riding this whole, like, I'm empowered, I'm independent, and I don't need a man to tell me anything about myself. I don't need to change anything. So I was really stubborn. Oh God, the stubbornness was like, it was sickening, like the level of stubbornness that I had. And then, oh man, so to actually start to overcome the triggers, I had to start dealing with them, which again would bring more pain, would bring more crying, it would bring me to a place that I had to completely shift myself. This is like an ongoing process as well, so it's not something that is just like a one and done situation. This is still going on 3 years later, although it's a lot less. We've done a lot of the work, but everything is pointing you towards healing. Everything, when you meet your twin flame, is about recognizing all those things that you've not dealt with in your life that need to be healed, and that person's going to come into your life and then shake them all up. So you're like a snow globe, and think about all those tiny fragments as trauma, as things that need healing, as belief systems. There's like so much stuff. The beliefs for me were just, I think, probably the hardest thing to get rid of, because they're so ingrained, and it's something that obviously I'd been brought up believing in certain things, and lack of belief in certain things, especially around myself. But Alex, like, he immediately saw my potential, like, within our first encounter, and then he also recognised where I was falling short inside myself of that person, in the way that I looked, in the way that I felt about myself, in the way that I didn't set boundaries with other people, in the way that I spoke my relationships to my friends and family, in what I was willing to accept for myself, and my dreams and future, you know. He was the one that helped me uncover all the gifts and abilities that I now have and I'm so confident in. Okay, so let me get back on track to tell you where things started to go a little bit hairy. So there was a lot of anger happening, and we had this little flat in Sheffield that I moved into after about 5 months. So there's me and my cat. We moved out of our own little place that we were really comfortable in and moved to this shared apartment with Alex, and then we had his little girl as well, who was at the time, I think she was 18 months. So we had this tiny flat, and the flat was a kind of, it was like a healing space, but somewhere you wouldn't expect it. It didn't feel like a healing space, but it was just happened to be the space that we found each other in. And there were demons in that flat. There was dark shadows passing by the window at night. There were dreams, nightmares, terrors. All this started to happen after I kind of moved in. There was a lot of anger. We were in and out of work and jobs, between kind of going into like a spiritual sickness. Alex was coming off the back of quite a lengthy stint on the SSRI medication, so there were so many, like, we just decided to kind of like throw all these balls up into the air, and it was just, it felt chaotic. There were arguments that I'd never experienced, and I used to run away so often at the start. Oh my god, we established quite quickly that I was the runner. So I would kind of like, I would be ringing my mum up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, like, oh, we've had this really bad argument and it's over and I'm packing my bags. And I think I did that maybe 3 or 4 times over the course of that first 18 months, until we finally grappled with the understanding that separation just felt horrific. Like, we would separate, and then maybe about 12 to 24 hours later, we couldn't stop like messaging each other, and there was a lot of like deep apologising, and it was just like, it was so necessary to come back into who we needed to be around each other. And then more work would be done. There'd be more things that would come up, and it started to almost happen like every single day. There was either really intense love or really intense like pull push kind of momentum going on. So we eventually moved out of the flat after about 6 months, and this was just before kind of COVID hit, and we got this beautiful little cottage that we're actually still in now. And 2 months later, we found out obviously lockdown was happening, so we were kind of like forced back inside. I used to find it really kind of relieving that I got to go to work at the time, because it was like, oh man, this relationship is like so intense, I need a break. And I was always kind of trying to dip back in to a bit of a normal life, because my world at home was so turbulent, and there was so many spiritual practices that needed to be committed to that I wasn't ready to do at the time. So this kind of brought us, like, it forced us into this space together so that we could, and I felt like it was like divine timing to us. So we are here, and we moved to Barnsley. We wanted to be closer to Alex's daughter, and we just sat in the countryside, which is beautiful, and it felt a lot more healing of a space. You know, we've got beautiful fire and just more space that we needed, but at the same time, oh man. So again, we're in this space, everything's really great for about a month or two, again, masking it with various addictions. And then the arguments came back, and this was happening quite regularly. I think one time, I think it was quite early on, since after we moved in, that I called the police, and they came round because Alex had thrown a cushion at me, and I was really triggered. And oh man, we used to have the worst arguments. Like, we'd be saying things to each other that were just so beyond, like, evil and nasty. Like, anything that we could do to, like, it was like sword fighting with words, and like, who can get the hardest jab. So again, it was like, I got to this point where I was like, I need to go, this is over, I can't handle this anymore, this is horrific. You know, I'd go to my mum's, or, you know, I'd go out for the next day, and we'd sometimes it just became like this thing where we'd be in the same house, but we'd sleep in separate bedrooms for about a week, not talk to each other, but like passing, you know, I'd hide in one room while Alex went into a different one. It was all this kind of thing going on. But I think it was only in the past, like, maybe 6 months that we started to recognise that the more that we went into separation, it just kind of delayed the work that needed to be done, and delayed the love that was there underneath it all. So for me, I struggled to be the one to kind of come back round after an argument, because I was really stubborn and happy to kind of sit in it and be like, I want him to apologise. But the more I can find love in my heart, and the more that I recognised that I created this person, I create Alex every single day. I create him in my world, I create him in my heart, I create my relationship just through how I think of him, how I portray him to the world. This is someone that's like, he is the exact of me, but also the opposite. And you hear people say that, don't you? Like, oh, that we're like exact opposites, but he really is. Like, we are almost exactly the same energetically, but there's a lot of things that we do differently, and we take different approaches to things. So I've really felt recently how easy it is for people in the twin flame community to run away. And I also understand how painful that separation is, even though we've only experienced it in fleeting, brief moments. Because even though it's the most painful thing when you're fighting and arguing, I feel like there's no worse pain than being in full separation. I think that would just tear my spirit, and the work's going to keep needing to be done. That it's not going to finish until you reunite. And whether that's in this lifetime or whether that's in your next incarnation, it will be finished at some point. Our spirits formed a pact before we incarnated into this body, and I've known Alex for many lifetimes. Our spirits have met, but we've never completed the work. So we are now in a place where we have to constantly commit to spirit. We have to constantly commit to each other, commit to loving and being energetically connected. I have to share so many thoughts all day, and I'm a completely different person to how I was like 3 years ago. Oh man, like, I wouldn't recognise this person here talking right now. I wouldn't have even dared get on a camera and film a video. But yeah, here I am. So to be in a twin flame relationship it could look really great. You know, we have a lot of great moments, but there's a lot of darkness too. But we're learning to love both. You know, it's a polarization. We are here to do the work. We are here to share our story with other people and help other people, because we've put the work in here. We've spent so many days and hours together, really like picking apart our own selves so that we can heal, so that our spirit combined can eventually find union and oneness back with the divine source. And again, this can, you know, I've battled with that a lot, because to tell somebody that, oh, this person's like the other half of your soul, and I mean, I don't think twin flames is even necessary as a label, because it's just something that someone made up down the line. And I think a soul partner or a spiritual partner, whatever you want to call yourself, if you can find it in yourself to offer unconditional love for that person wherever they are, and just believe and trust that you will find union. And if you can stick out all those arguments, all that pain, all that struggle, you will eventually find your union. So yeah, I mean, oh God, I could talk about this for days, because there's so many intricate moving parts. But we're going to leave it there for today, and I hope that some of my story has maybe resonated with you. And I am going to do more on twin flames and union, and how we've found love, and what we've kind of done in our own individual practices to help that along the way. Thank you so much again for just choosing to listen to me talk to you about my experience. I mean, wow, like, here I am 3 years later, and I am now talking to a beautiful community of people also experiencing the same thing that I have, which at the time, at least at the very start, felt like a really lonely experience. So know that you are not alone, and I love you so much, and thank you from Alex and I can't wait to see you again. If you want to see more, let me know below if there's anything particular that you would want me to talk about. Bye, darling. See you soon.